Okay, you're going to have to help us to bear with it in the program. We've done these for a lot of years. And all of a sudden, you get to a critical point in the program and they crank up the P-47 or whatever. So if you can't hear, let us know. And speakers, sometimes you're going on a story and there's a bunch of planes flying by and you're focused on your story, so I might stop you. Well, we'll just have to bear with it. It's not pouring rain, it's not 100 degrees, so we've got a pretty good day. I'm Doug Bekke. I work with the World War II History Roundtable at Fort Snelling, which tells the stories of World War II veterans. And our starting our 27th year, I think. I'm also the curator of the State's Military History Museum up in Camp Ripley, which if you're a Minnesotan and you haven't been there and you like military history, please come up. It's a really good museum. And as a Minnesotan, it's your museum, so come and see it. The first seminar of the weekend is World War II fighters. And today we have 3 World War II fighter pilots with us. We have Wayne Johnson, who was with the Flying Tigers. We have Harold Brown, who was a Tuskegee Airman. And we have Al Lieberman, who flew a P-47 in Europe. So at the end, if we have time, we may have a little bit of time for questions. Usually we don't, but you can see the panelists set their tables in the other tent the rest of the afternoon. So, okay, thanks for coming. Wayne Johnson, why did you want to fly, very briefly, and how did you get in the Air Force?
I was in high school. Can you hear me now? I was in high school and I did chores for a farmer who had an airplane, and he gave me flying lessons in exchange for my doing his chores. I soloed, and I can't remember how many hours I had at the time. And of course, when Pearl Harbor came along, I joined the Air Force or Air Corps, the Army Air Corps, and was assigned to fighter pilot training. And I went through their 3 stages: primary school, basic flying, and then advanced.
We'll get back to that. Harold Brown, you were from Minneapolis. Can you talk about what caused your interest in flying and then your entry into the Air Force?
Well, when I was about in 6th grade, I liked the thing that just think right up to my mouth now. How's that? Closer? I'll be kissing it. When I was about in 6th grade, I like to think I had a love affair with the airplane. And from that point on, I was making the models, rubber bands to propel the props and whatnot. There was a book out in the library out on Emerson Avenue and Ocean Boulevard, and it was called The Life of an Army Air Corps Cadet, Randolph Field, Texas, West Point of the Air. And I suppose I read that book, I could almost memorize it. I was also at that time delivering papers, and as you know, in about 1938-39, there was the great debate whether or not they would allow guys like us fly. So I used to keep track of it since I was out in the Pittsburgh career. I was always up to date, and that was the one paper that pretty much took the lead in this big political fight that was going on in the Congress, trying to decide if they would or would not let us fly. So I kept right up to date with it. And I can recall it was back in about 1940 or so, they finally announced, yeah, we're going to let them fly. And I can remember Halloween The guys used to always tease me, call me, hey there, Glenberg, they won't even let you watch that airplane, let alone fly well, and ha ha ha. So I said, you guys just wait. By the time I'm ready, all the problems will be solved. I'm going to join. It'll all become history. That's just about the way it happened.
And when did you actually join up? When did you actually join up?
Oh, right out of high school, in June 1942, when they announced that they would take high school graduates. First, they wanted 4 years of college, 2 years of college, not enough. High school graduates, fine. And they started a program called College Training Detachment. So the kids that went in high school, if you passed the mental physical exam, they bring you in. But then for the next 4 to 6 months, you were what they call an aviation student, rather than going to some college. For my studies, I was down at Tuskegee Institute, and I went for about 4 months because I scored reasonably high on the mental exams. And then from there, we went 8 miles up to Tuskegee Army Airfield, where we then became aviation cadets, and we were officially in the program.
Al Lieberman, you were from Valley City, North Dakota, and can you talk about what prompted you to want to be a pilot? And when you joined, and then when did you join the Air Force?
I really can't tell you what my reasoning was, but I graduated from Valley City High School, and I went to the University of Minnesota, and I wanted to be a physicist. And I was in my first quarter, and the bomb dropped. Japan hit Pearl Harbor, and everybody was enlisting. I had registered as a physicist, which I all of a sudden realized it was not my cup of fish, so I switched to engineering. But I had a deferment till June of 1945, I think, or something, but I didn't think that was going to work, and I wasn't interested in it anyway. Everybody was enlisting, and I remember watching Northwest Airlines planes fly over Valley City on their way someplace, and I'd never been off the ground except with a pair of stilts. And I decided to enlist, and from then on it was just history. It was meant to be. I was a born pilot, I think. I was the first in my group, entire group. I finally got into actual flying training to solo, and our first plane was primary. It was a Airman, open cockpit biplane, and it was a fantastic skill that I think was on the ground. And their most aerobatic plane I've ever seen. They're marvelous, and I could do things with it during training that were just like second nature. So I was the first to solo, and I could do anything with it. I went through all my training. I loved it, and all I can say is that it was meant to be.
Okay, and so you feel that the training was very good?
Oh, it was fantastic.
And out of training, you got the assignment that you wanted, the fighters?
Well, at first, yes, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't want to be in a bomber and just be well, that's more routine. And I was, I used to really do some stunts with that Stearman. And so the fighter plane that I really wanted was a Mustang, because it was fast and it was aerobatic and it was a powerful fighter plane.
But you got a P-47.
But I was assigned to P-47s. I was in the Army, so I did what the Army says. And
Talk about the power of the P-47.
well, first let me say that the P-47 has the most amazing tough plane and the most armament. And by the time I was really into it, I knew that that was the plane I wanted to be. And it was absolutely the toughest, the best war tool, I think, that the U.S. had in Germany. We could carry 1,000-pound bomb under each wing on an external shackle. We could carry a 500-pound bomb under the belly shackle externally, and only because 1,000-pound wouldn't clear the ground. It had 8 50 caliber machine guns, armor-piercing incendiary, and if you can all see me, a 50 caliber cartridge is about this long. It is the most powerful, fast-firing piece of equipment that the Army had at the time. And it had 8 50 caliber machine guns. It was the most powerful plane, and it was not used as it was designed to do as high altitude escort for the bombers.
Okay. Wayne Johnson, you flew P-40s. And is that what you wanted to do? You wanted to be a fighter pilot, so you got the assignment you wanted out of training?
Yes, I did.
And you flew P-40s. Can you talk about the P-40 a little bit?
The P-40 was a very rugged airplane. You could shoot it full of holes, but it would still fly. It was a hard airplane to take off and land because the landing gear was very narrow. And if you didn't get on the right rudder immediately as you get a power, it would, what we call the ground loop, it would spin around on the ground. And you had to be very careful landing. You tried to always land just on the main gear. You landed wheels first on the main gear. You didn't try to land it what we call 3-point, so that all 3 wheels touched the ground at the same time. And that was true on both takeoff and landing. As I said, it was a very rugged airplane, and it had 6 50 caliber guns, so it had a lot of striking power. You could actually knock a locomotive off the track if you hit it right with that kind of ammo.
Harold Brown, you ended up with P-51s, but did you start out with P-40s?
No, we were using P-40s for final transition. After you finished advanced training, which you were flying the T-6, then they would give you about 20 hours in the P-40 for that transition. Then it's interesting, he was talking about a P-47. After I finished the introduction to fighters, I went down to Roller Barrel, and all my fighter training was in the P-47D model. And the reason why that happened is that the 332nd had just joined the 15th Air Force, and they were given P-47, but they only kept them for 30 days. How do you hear me? But they only had them for about 30 days. But I got all my fighter trainings in the P-47. And just to echo what he was talking about, I thought that was about the greatest airplane going. Matter of fact, I've seen guys go out on practice missions. They would lose the lower two cylinders of that R2800 engine, and that thing would go chug chug, but it would keep running, and you get all the way back to the base. I often have thought about, boy, if I had had a P-47 when I was strafing, and when I went down, as opposed to that little inline engine, which was all coolant. You could take a 45, and if they hit the right line and you lose your coolant, that was the end of the P-51. It was going to stop running in about 2 or 3 minutes. Whereas with that big jug, if I had been in a similar position, I'm certain that that jug would have brought me home. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I flew the P-51. But the P-51 was really a very, very cute airplane. But I think at altitude, the jug would just about maneuver as well as the P-51 would. And this is at altitude, 29, 30, 31, 42,000 feet. That jug was really fantastic. Matter of fact, they had a supercharger. We had 2 throttles. And they always told us you never allow your supercharger to ever get ahead of your primary throttle, which controlled your engine. And you constantly kept, with your hand on both of them, you always made sure that your turbocharger never got in front of your primary throttle, which is for your engine, or else you have trouble with it. But in answer to your question, the P-40, the P-47, and then I flew the P-51 in combat.
And see, who went overseas first? You got there later, I think, Northern Europe. When did you go to China?
1942, I believe.
42, but you got over in later 43? 44? Okay, so keeping in chronology here. Flying in China against the Japanese, what kind of missions were you flying? And where were you flying out of?
I was trained primarily as a low-level pilot, and so most of my missions were low-level, strafing enemy airfields, troop concentrations, and shipping. So I think I only flew about 2 or 3 high-altitude missions, and of course, strafing enemy airfields, they had a lot of firepower that they could throw up at you. And we were told to just take 1 pass, high speed, and then get out of there. I was flying with a guy named Mel Shear, and he had a tendency to not only go once, but he'd go around 2 or 3 times. And on one occasion when I was flying with him, he said, Shear, let's get the hell out of here, they're shooting at us. And he said, take it easy, lady, they're supposed to shoot at us, there's war on. Which was very comforting.
Did you have any aerial encounters with Japanese pilots?
Yes, I did have. Most of my missions I was flying as a wingman, either on the flight leader's wing or on the echelon leader's wing. And my job as a wingman was to watch out for Japanese coming up on the rear, so that I could warn the flight leader of the day. And that worked very well. And most of the time, we would fly as a 4-plane group. Very seldom would we fly 2-plane missions. And they were very successful. One mission that we flew against the big Japanese base at Shanghai, our intelligence had found out that the Japanese had moved in a bunch of planes from Formosa because they expected MacArthur's forces to land on the east coast of China. And so the Shanghai airports was just filled with planes. And there were 4 of us went in, and the planes were lined up in neat rows because they didn't think we had enough that we could fly in that distance. And we destroyed 94 Japanese airplanes on the ground and 4 in the air, which was probably one of the best fighter strikes we had during the war. General Chanel said it was the most successful mission we had. Some of our intelligence people thought we did such a great job, we should go back the next day and get the rest of them. And of course, then the Japs were waiting for us. And out of the 8 airplanes that day, they shot down 4 of us. All of the pilots, however, were rescued by the Chinese, and
that gets into a personal story we're going to get back to. Okay. Harold Brown, you went to Italy, and you want to talk about the type of missions that you were flying?
When the group first went overseas, they were at Naples, Italy, and they had the old P-39. And for the first couple of months, they were just flying non-combat, really, just patrol duty. And I think on only one mission, the guys flew that they even saw a German aircraft. And in February, General Akers, who had just taken over the 15th Air Force, called Colonel B.O. Davis and said, let's have a chit-chat. And at that time, he talked about, in the month of February, he had lost 111 bombers and crews. That's a lot of people. And that was in February 1944. And he said, I need help. And one of the reasons that General Akers was very concerned about was the amount of time that the escort fighters were spending going off looking for personal victory. And that was a no-no as far as Akers was concerned. And B.O. Davis' response, he did a couple of flip-flops, says, just what I've been waiting for. So Akers brought the 332nd Fighter Group that was normally assigned to the 12th Fighter Group, tactical, over to the 15th. Now the 15th was strictly strategic bombing. They could put up about 600 bombers and about 400 fighters, as opposed to the 8th Air Force. The mighty 8th Air Force could put up 2,000 bombers and 1,200 fighters. That was a big Air Force. And, but they were bombing from east to west. We were flying from north to south, hitting all of these southern targets. But the mission was the same. It was escorting bombers, strategic bombing, and obviously, you know, the way you win a war is that you protect the bombers, you get up, you get the munition plants, you get the oil refineries, you get the ball bearing plant, to the point where they can no longer sustain a war. And after a while, you say, I quit. So this was General Akers, and B.O. Davis told Akers, hey, you will have no problem with the 332nd. We would do our job. And I can remember when I came over, B.O. Davis met us, you know, how you doing? Fine, we were happy to have you in the outfit, you know, yaka yaka. He says, I got one rule here. If you ever leave a bomber going off looking for personal victories, I don't care how many airplanes you shoot down. When you come back, I'm going to court-martial you, I'm going to ground you. So So that was his philosophy, and it wasn't long before bomber pilots were talking about who are those red-tailed guys flying these airplanes. They had no idea who we were. And we gained a heck of a reputation over there because we would not leave the bombers. It's interesting, there were times when you go in the bomber and they come off the bomber and are half shot up and whatnot. The bombers are screaming for fire cover because of personal ducks having lost an engine or two. And we would fly up, and boy, the gunners and whatnot, and the airplane would see us coming, hey, 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 you know. But it got to the point where most of the bomber schools were starting to request the red-tailed pilots. As a matter of fact, on B.O. Davis's airplane, he put a little sign on his airplane, by request, because we were getting so many people requesting that our group be assigned for their protection, but it was strictly escort, and that was the mission. Escort the bombers, get them up there, get them back home safely, and that was our job.
Now, Lieberman, when did you arrive in England?
It was in late 44, I believe.
Well, when was it?
Late 44.
Late 44. So you started initially flying out of England, and then you moved your unit to France.
Yes.
Can you talk about the kind of missions that you were flying in your P-47?
All right. When we got over to France in Normandy, they had us flying close support to an army that was trying to get a German battalion, which was dug in right inside the French border, and we got and we were at that time. They realized they had a powerful plane, a Thunderbolt, that could carry bombs, could machine gun, could do anything and everything, and haul a lot of armament. All of a sudden, we got word that flashed over from headquarters that a German cruiser, which is the next size under the battleship size, was steaming into Brest Harbor to restock this dug-in German battalion. And they used our fighter group to try to do the job on that cruiser. The way it happened was that our fighter group, which consisted of 3 squadrons, was assigned to attack the cruiser. The commander of the fighter group, the top officer, I think it was just short of becoming a general at that time. We brought over the top of the cruiser a flight of Thunderbolts at about just under 10,000 feet, and run from central France on over, headed straight for the cruiser. And they, of course, knew about that. They had spotted that with their radars. And as that flight started to approach the cruiser, every muzzle on that cruiser was aimed at the air, up in the air. In the meantime, the commander of our fighter group, and I think there were several other wingmen with him, had started coming just over the ground at high speed, and they virtually flew right up to the cruiser, which didn't even expect it. And they slammed at high speed armor-piercing bombs into the center of that cruiser in each center, which is a pretty remarkable thing because I had a picture of our commander's plane, and it showed a couple of swastikas on the side, which meant a swastika was shot down for every one, and the cruiser on the side of his plane. So our fighter group, the 362nd Fighter Group, 9th Army Air Corps, had a hand in virtually every single activity, major battle of the European War. I personally also flew missions over the Remagen bridgehead, which was the St. Lo breakthrough when General Patton's armament, his tanks, were breaking through and going non-stop across France and into Germany. I was involved in missions over the Bastogne Bulge, and there was more flak flown or shot into the air than you could almost land on and stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about flak a little bit and the way you approached a ground target when you were expecting to encounter a lot of German flak, and then specifically talk about one close call you had with enemy flak in your wing.
Yes, we were assigned to take out, the German army had surrounded Bastogne, and we were trying to wipe out our army that was caught in Bastogne. And there was so much armament, and at that point, if they had broken loose, they would be rolling back towards France. I had 3 bombs on external shackles, one under each wing and one under the belly. And I can't remember exactly what the target was, but I was coming down on a dive bombing run. And when you come down off a dive bombing run, as soon as you let your bombs loose and you peel off, and you're doing all kinds of evasive action because every gun on the ground was aimed at you. I got up to, I'm going to guess at this point, about 7,000 or 8,000 feet, and the top officer in our group on that mission called me, and he said, "You still got your bomb, it didn't release." And then he said, "Don't go back down now." Yeah. Now we had lost a few planes on the first run because so much flak was being fired into the air. He says, "Just drop it on a straight and level run," which I did. And probably I wouldn't have been back up. I would have hit with flak and I would have ended it. So I think that's one of the close calls that I had.
Okay, well, one day you didn't have a close call, you actually got hit and you looked at your wing. So just talk about that real briefly.
Yeah, that was the most amazing thing. And I think somebody upstairs was looking out for me because I can't even remember, but I was at about mid-altitude, but all of a sudden there was a tremendous bang, and my plane just it shook and tilted slightly, and I could tell it was on the left wing. caliber machine gun cartridges and lots of cables for operating the ailerons and the trim tabs. And it was lucky that nothing exploded. It was still flyable and reasonably good. It didn't affect the airworthiness of it at all. And I was able to get back to base. All right, landed well, everything. But there was a gaping hole, and if you could see my hands up here, the hole, I'm going to guess, was about this big. It just, like, the entire, my guess is it had to be a 20 millimeter cannon shell, which is a small one. But whatever it was, it didn't harm anything other than the moderate airworthiness of that wing. It showed the unbelievable strength of that airframe. And then, with a good Lord watching, not taking out anything that would keep me from coming back home safe and sound. So that was one of the miracles.
Okay, Wayne Johnson, you also had an encounter that was less lucky but had a good outcome. You want to talk about that?
We were strafing a Japanese big airborne at Callahan. There were 4 of us in P-51s. And that base had a lot of very accurate anti-aircraft people. And the P-51 was vulnerable because, at a low level, because the coolant lines were in the belly. And if you got hit in the coolant line, the engine would burn up and stop in about 3 minutes. And as we were going across the field, I got hit. And I could tell it because the temperature started going up to the top. I had plenty of speed, and then I could climb up to altitude and nail out. But I didn't dare do that because the Japs had the bad habit at that time of shooting guys in parachutes. So I decided that I had to try to belly it in someplace. And I saw this nice gravel road, and it was very straight. And it looked like it had bushes on both sides of the road. So I decided to belly land there. And just as I was leveling out to hit the ground, I realized that those bushes were big boulders. And because it's very narrow, just as I hit the ground, it ripped both wings off. And then it turned a little, and the tail hit the boulder and ripped that off. And then it spun around the other way, and the engine hit the boulder and ripped that off. So all I had sliding was the cockpit. And there were a couple of Chinese fellows in the rice fields nearby and saw me go in. And amazingly enough, I wasn't really hurt. I sprained both ankles and sprained both of my thumbs because one hand was on the stick and the other on the throttle. And when I came to that sudden stop, it dislocated both my thumbs, and they were laying back against my wrist. It didn't hurt until I grabbed hold of them and snapped them back in place. And that started a bit. Well, these Chinese were very good about rescuing American airmen. And these 2 guys came running, and one of them put me on his back, and he probably was about 5'6", probably weighed 120 pounds. And at that time, I weighed about 160. So he had quite a load to carry. And he ran literally for miles, carrying me in that position. And then he switched with his partner, and they finally got me far enough away so that I was away from the jet, that they wouldn't capture me. They put me in a little lake, and whenever the Japanese patrols would get close, they would make a noise out in the field, and then they told me to duck under the water. And there was a lot of reeds in there, and I could actually breathe through a reed below the water, so I was able to escape them. And then as soon as it got dark, these guys picked me up, and we traveled only at night for about 4 days until we came to a little village where there was an American preacher that had a school there. And then he was able to radio back to my base, and then they carried me close enough so they could send a plane for me. So I guess that was probably the most exciting mission I ever flew.
Okay, Al Lieberman, you had a close encounter that turned out pretty good. You had an encounter way too close that almost turned out disastrously. Harold Brown, you had a real bad day one day, and do you want to? You live to tell about it, but you want to talk about your experience.
Well, I had really 2 bad days. On my 12th mission in Rebel Germany, and the Germans had just put out a new the Me-262, which is a twin-engine jet, extremely fast. As a matter of fact, it was 75, 80 miles faster than our P-51 was. But they had a very, very short range. We had spotted them up there several days earlier, and they would dance around, but they left the bombers alone, so we left them alone. But on this particular day, they really came in. Major Camel, squadron commander, who was leading the flight, and said, I think they're coming all the way this time. So we dropped our tanks and they came in. We broke down on them. And one of the favorite maneuvers of German pilots, and at times it was a good maneuver, but there were many times when it was a stupid maneuver. And here he had an airplane that straight level flight he could separate from me at the rate of 80, 90 miles an hour, and create all kinds of separation distance. He decided to do a split S from 30,000 feet and go straight down. Now, aerodynamically, he couldn't go any faster because aerodynamically he was subsonic and he had enough power to go at max speed. Aerodynamically at max speed is straight level flight. He went, so goes into a dive, he is still at that exact same speed. Well, with the P-51, we were not at the fastest speed that we could go. So when I rolled over from 30,000 feet, I not only got the engine at full power, but I got gravity helping me now. So the separation distance now, instead of being 80 miles an hour, is now just about cut in half. So I had myself and my wingman, and as we were going down, we got him in the sight. And I said, Stu, just shoot, we might get a lucky shot. So we followed him all the way down the ground, and it's kind of stupid on my part because we should have broken off earlier, because he was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But here I was 20 years old, I got an Me-262 in my sight. Did you think I was going to break it off? No way, no way. So we went all the way down the ground. He goes screaming across the treetops level, and at that point we were about to break away anyway. But just before we broke off, he led us over a flat track, and everything came up at us. So I got hit, we broke off, we got back to friendly territory, we became separated. I lost my radios, and Rich was picking up a heading for home from the big Hummer we had up in northern Italy. And he was screaming at me, "Hey, Harold, the heading home is such and such," but I couldn't hear him. But I just flew due south knowing perfectly well that I would finally get back to friendly territory. Well, I got back over in the northern Italy friendly territory, but then I had fuel exhaustion. Now, I'll tell you a very big secret. Never give a fighter pilot time to think. That's the worst position where you can put them in. You know, I've been trained to respond in terms of milliseconds. So here I am, out of fuel, 25,000 feet, so I just sat there. I'm coming down like a rock, you know. So I had a conversation. What are you going to do, bro? Oh, I don't know. I'll wait until I get a lower. I'll make up my mind. I'm getting lower and lower. Hey, Harold, you're 220, you're 320,000. Are you going to jump? No, I'm not going to jump. I'll wait until I get down 15, maybe 15,000, 10,000, and so it goes. I'm having a little conversation. And finally I said, Harold, you got to make up your mind. You got a small amount of time left. About that time, I sighted a nice abandoned fighter strip, about 4,000 feet. Got it made. Not till I could do anything in a P-51 anyway. You know, the greatest thing that ever said good morning to a P-51. But when you're 19, 20 years old, that's why they send young guys off to war, because they're foolish, they're invincible, and they think they can do everything. So the generals are very smart in sending the young guys off to war. But nevertheless, I'm coming down, and as I got closer and closer to the field, I made a commitment. I noticed that the field was cut right in half, about a 10-foot ditch, so it broke it up into 2,000 feet. No sweat, I could land it on 2,000, I could do this. So here I am jockeying in, and I'm thinking in terms of microseconds. The first half, nope, too hot, gotta land in the second half. Second half, nope, I'll probably land right in the ditch if I try to stretch it. Better land in the first half. First half, no. Second half, back and forth. Now I'm doing this in terms of microseconds, and I got seconds to make up my mind. So I said, come on, girl, you got to do something. So I just landed down in the first half, in the belly, drove it, you know, hits the ditch, comes up, the fuselage breaks right behind the canopy, and as it's teetering up on its nose, the rudder was up where the prop was. And I was fearful it might fall over in his back, residual fuel, there might be a fire, and I might get trapped. But it teeters, flops back on his belly. I jumped out of the airplane. I already had jettisoned the canopy. And I jumped out of the airplane and got away from it, just in case. And what do you think I did after that? Well, I dusted off my uniform. I dusted off, said, great job, girl, man, you know, fantastic landing. You set it down nice and smooth on a 2,000-foot strip. Beautiful job. The only unfortunate thing is I had to call my squadron commander. I got down to a friendly base and called him. And he says, why didn't you break it off here? Why didn't you break it off? You know you weren't going to catch him. I said, but I had him in my sight, Major Campbell. Yeah, but he was out of range. You knew he was out of range. Well, blame it on the exuberance of youth. What did I say that for? He said dash, 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 dash. And you done dash, 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 dash. And you get your dash, dash, dash here as fast as you can. Okay, well, you get the picture. The next event occurred on my 30th mission, on the strafing mission. And we had a wonderful day that day. It was an area in which the Germans could see us go up. They knew what time we would come back. They were here, us coming. They would take all the marshalling officers, railroad trains, locomotives, and run them into the tunnels. You know, you come down, and we knew what they were doing. And said, well, they're in the tunnels, you know, no time to see it, so we go home. Well, the 15th Air Force decided, we're going to get these guys. So they had a special mission. They gave the mission to the 332nd. The 332nd gave the mission to the 99 Fighter Squadron. So we took off early in the morning, and we got up into this area. It ran about 100 miles from Linz, Austria, southeast by about 100, 150 miles or so. And, oh my goodness, it was like, you know, throwing the fox in the briar patch. It was just locomotives all over the place, all kinds of railway traffic, and he said, look what we got. So we started at the southern end of it. We dropped off a flight a few miles later. We dropped off a flight. We had about 20 airplanes or so. Dropped up a flight. Again, I was flying with good old Major Campbell on his wing. I always had bad luck when I flew with him. But all the way up, we're up the top, all kinds of chatter. Guys are just blowing up locomotives. We were having a fantastic day. So we came back down, and the rest of the squadron was certainly waiting for our flight to come back. And as we started to climb up, break it off, Cameron looks over and he says, "We missed one." And there is this great big engine with a double sets of drivers. He says, "So let's go get him, Brian." So we went down on him, and he was firing. I could see the smoke coming over his wing. Oh man alive. I love it. So he breaks it off. That's two of them. There's going to be a third one. Probably not. Okay, so he breaks it off. I'm continuing on. I got this locomotive lit up like a Christmas tree every time I pull it in. You guys do lousy maintenance here. Never mind. I can hold it. So I got this thing lit up, and I told myself, here we get off the coast, it's time to break it off. And just about the time I started to break it off, right behind the locomotive, to the boxcars, the sides drop off. There's 2 pom-pom guns on one, 2 pom-pom guns on the other. They got 4 rifles each. That's 16 rifles. And they are starting to shoot. Every 5th post of caliber is a tracer, and I got tracers coming up like crazy. And they look like little small golf balls, you know, right up over the wing. And I said, "Oh, Harold, what have you got yourself into now? Oh, no." Well, if I pulled up, I would have been a second done. So I said, no, just drive it. It's got to blow up. It's got to blow up. And it blew up just as I passed over. One great big huge explosion. The locomotive blows. I'm caught in that explosion. It takes all of the boxcars right behind the locomotive with it. So all I could think of when that happened was, wait until I get back at base. I went in, my hand on the trigger, I recorded that whole great big explosion. When these guys see these gunnery films, boy, it's going to be the greatest set of gunnery films they've ever seen. That's all I could think of. Well, I pulled up, and all of a sudden the oil pressure starts going down in the wrong direction. The oil temperature starts moving in the wrong direction. I knew I was in trouble. So I started climbing up. And then all of a sudden, all that white coolant, apparently they got the coolant line, and all that coolant came right across the windshield. And a prop that is supposed to be turning, all of a sudden is staring you right in the face, running those 4-bladed props. When it's supposed to be turning, that just isn't right. Something's wrong. So within a short while, the engine quits on me, so I rolled it up, kicked the stick up. It threw me out of the aircraft. I only had about 1,000 feet, so I bailed out of it. And I landed, and within about 30 minutes or so, I was picked up by the constables. And they took me back to part of the area that we had been strafing. Now, intelligence officers always tell you, never go down in the target area. There's some angry people down there, rightly so. You're shooting up the place, shrapnel all over the place. You might hit some guy's wife, his mother. They're angry. And as I walked through the village, I met about 40 of the angriest people I've ever seen in my life. But I had 2 young constables with me, and it was clear at that moment, Harold, you're going to die today. I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. I didn't speak German, obviously. They're going boom, boom. I know what that means. They're making a sign of a noose. I know what that means. They had ski poles and they were pulling them down. I know what that means. So now I'm talking to myself. Because I actually think I was primarily in a state of shock. I said, Harold, what are you doing up in Germany in the middle of a war looking like this? This is the last place you want to be. But here I was. So, what are you going to do? You know they're going to kill you. What are you going to do, Harold? I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, I'll just wait until they get ready to do, and I'll just respond. I'll do something. And they'll probably wind up shooting. So about this time, another constable way in the back, who I paid no attention to, grabs me by the shoulder, pulls me back. One minute.
We're running out of time.
Oh, man alive. I'm just getting into it. So,
We got another story over here.
So he pulls me the back. He puts the rifle, around the rifle. Now, think about that for a moment. Deep in Germany, in this German village, there is a constable. He probably knew everybody in that crowd. He had to. He might even have a brother or sister in the crowd. But here he was. He keeps the people off of me. We go down to a pub. We lock ourselves in. They're beating on the doors. This was in March. It's getting close. They disperse. A little later, we go out the back door. We go down the next village. He calls, I guess, on the army. A little while later, up comes a truck with a couple of soldiers. They take me down to another village. And now I'm going to end it when I'm going to tell you what happened after that. Just 1 second. You're lonely as hell. Every time you hear a little noise, you wonder, oh my God, what's going to happen now? You know, because you're frightened to death. You know, and I'm only 20 years old, you know, young punk, you know. But a big mission went over and I said, geez, I just might get coming. Not that I hope it was somebody who had the same misfortune that I had, but if they did, it would be nice if they wound up with me, so I wouldn't be alone. And it happened that way. They brought in a bomber crew about midnight, all wild-eyed and whatnot, and they divided us up into about 4 cells. And there was a young kid there, and he said, geez, sir, he says, after they found out that, you know, the normal, but hey, are you a pilot? Yeah, I'm a pilot. You got legs? Oh, you're an American. Yeah, I'm an American pilot. When you go down and you go through all that. He says, no, I'm frightened to death. What's the matter? I'm Jewish. I said, all you got to do is to keep your mouth shut. I can't hide. So that was only making joke, you know, a little humor under the worst of circumstances. But long story short, we went up to Nuremberg. We were interrogated from Nuremberg. We walked from Nuremberg down to Moosburg. Moosburg's about 30 miles north of Munich, Germany, and that is where Patton came in and rescued it. Now, all I want is 1 minute to tell one final story about George Patton. George Patton had the filthiest mouth.
I've lost control.
Oh yeah, you know I'm going to talk anyway. Patton was a big man, about 6'2". You know, he wore his breeches. He wore those pistols on the side, that sparkly helmet with 4 stars on it. Now, he knew perfectly well that he was about to go into this big prison camp, no question about it. But he came into that prison camp behind 2 tanks, and he was spotless. All pressed, everything was shining, his boots are sparkling, his 2 guns are sparkling, and Patton had the filthiest mouth of any man I ever heard talk. I mean, every other word. So he's standing up here. When I get to Berlin, I'm going to catch that paper hanger, I'm going to do such and such. And then I'm going to do such and such with that paper hanger. And you can fill in the dashes, anything you want. It will not be as bad as what he said. So he does this. And with Patton, I'm only telling this is all part of the story. At an earlier time, a newspaper guy came up to Patton, and he says, my goodness, he says, why do you carry those very beautiful pearl handle guns? Patton looked down at him and he said, let me tell you something, son. No one but a pimp in New Orleans would carry a pearl handle gun. These are ivory handle guns, and don't you ever forget it. True story.
As is always the problem, we've got too many stories, and they're all great. We've run out of time. We need to shut it down. Al Lieberman had 2 aerial victories against the Germans in was it Germany? It would have been over Germany, not France.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry we just don't have time. We've got another program coming up. What?
Speak up, Don, I can't.
They come to the tent.
What? Yeah, I'm going to say, please stop over to the tent where all the veterans are at their tables and talk to them there and hear his story. And I'm sure there's a lot more stories that we could only barely skim over here today. So thank you very much for coming. Next program is on the U-2s, SR-71s, and Kurt Brown, the Nassau astronaut. Please stick around if you can. Thank you. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Yes, yes. So if I go out, maybe what I'll do is see, I can just I got bad. Yeah, what you can do is